The massive orbital station hung in the darkness of space like a glittering jewel, its countless lights reflecting off the hulls of ships from across the galaxy. Inside the great chamber, representatives from hundreds of different worlds sat in carefully arranged sections, each species occupying their designated areas according to ancient protocols that had governed galactic politics for millennia. Ambassador Lihana adjusted her formal diplomatic robes as she took her seat in the human section, a relatively small area compared to the vast territories claimed by older, more established civilizations. Her dark eyes scanned the enormous chamber, taking in the diverse array of beings that made up the Galactic Council. There were the tall, ethereal Zephyrians, with their translucent skin and graceful movements. The heavily armored Krillians, whose warrior culture had dominated entire sectors. The mysterious ethereals, who seemed to shimmer in and out of physical existence. The atmosphere in the chamber was different today. Usually, these sessions were filled with the routine business of trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and cultural exchanges. But today, an undercurrent of fear ran through the assembly like electricity through circuits. Even the most powerful species seemed restless, their usual confidence replaced by something Lee had never seen before in galactic politics: genuine terror. The council president, an ancient being whose species had been part of the galactic community for over 10,000 years, rose from the central podium. The chamber fell silent as his voice echoed through the vast space, amplified by technology that translated his words into the native languages of every species present. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge, "we have received confirmation from our deep space monitoring stations. The threat we have long feared has finally arrived at our doorstep." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. Red markers appeared at the edge of the display, moving slowly but inexorably toward the galactic center. The markers represented something that had haunted the nightmares of every advanced civilization: the Devourers. Lee felt her breath catch in her throat as she studied the display. The red markers were not ships or fleets in any conventional sense. They were something far worse: a writhing mass of self-replicating machines that consumed everything in their path, converting matter into energy and energy into more machines. The display showed their previous conquests: 3 entire galactic clusters that had been reduced to empty void, their countless worlds and civilizations erased from existence. "Trajectory is confirmed," announced Dr. Kethfer, the Council's chief scientist, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence as he processed the data. "Based on their current speed and direction, total galactic consumption will begin within 2 standard years. Our most optimistic projections suggest complete annihilation within 5 years." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives leaped to their feet, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds that the translation system struggled to process. Some species communicated through color changes in their skin, others through complex pheromone releases, and still others through telepathic bursts that made nearby species recoil in distress. Lee watched in fascination and growing horror as the representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations began to panic. The Zephyrians, masters of faster-than-light travel, immediately began discussing evacuation routes to distant galaxies. Their trademaster stood and announced that transport services would be available to any species capable of payment, though the costs would be astronomical. The crystalline ethereals, beings who existed partially in higher dimensional planes, spoke of retreating entirely from physical reality. Their spokesperson, a shimmering figure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, explained that they could transcend to planes of existence where the Devourers could not follow. Even the Krillians, whose warrior culture had made them the most feared military force in the galaxy, announced their intention to flee. War Chief Thrak, a massive creature whose scarred hide told the story of countless battles, spoke with obvious shame but absolute conviction. "We have fought every enemy the galaxy has produced. We have never retreated from any battle. But this is not a battle, it is extinction. The Krillian Empire will seek survival in distant galaxies. One by one, species after species announced their evacuation plans. Some had already begun moving their populations to the galaxy's edge, preparing for the long journey to neighboring galactic clusters. Others spoke of going into deep hibernation, hoping to wait out the Devourer's passage. A few mentioned ancient, fallback positions in pocket dimensions or artificial realities where they might survive until the threat passed. As the discussions continued, Lee noticed that the attention of the chamber was gradually turning toward the human delegation. Humanity was the newest member of the Galactic Council, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries earlier. They were considered young, inexperienced, and largely insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. When the council president finally called for humanity's position, Lee stood slowly. The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. She could feel the weight of their expectations, their assumption that humanity would naturally follow the lead of their more experienced neighbors. The United Earth Government, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, despite its relatively small size, requests 72 hours to deliberate on this matter. The silence that followed was profound. Then, almost as one, the assembly began to murmur among themselves. The sounds were different now. Not the panic of before, but something that sounded almost like pity. Lee could see it in their expressions, in the way they looked at her with something approaching sympathy. They had already written humanity off. In their minds, these newcomers would spend their 72 hours coming to the same conclusion. As every other species, that survival meant flight, and flight meant abandoning everything they had built in this galaxy. As the session adjourned and the representatives began to file out, Lee caught the glances directed toward the human delegation. Some were pitying, others dismissive, but all carried the same underlying assumption that humanity would soon be joining the great exodus. Fleeing in terror from a threat too great to comprehend, Lee gathered her materials and prepared to return to Earth, knowing that the next 72 hours would determine not just humanity's fate, but perhaps the fate of the entire galaxy. The other species had already made their choice. Now, it was time to see what humanity would choose when faced with the impossible. The rebuilt United Nations complex in Geneva had never seen anything like this gathering. The massive assembly hall, constructed from gleaming metal and reinforced glass after the devastating wars of the previous century, now housed the most important meeting in human history. Every seat was filled, and holographic displays showed the faces of billions more citizens connected through the Neuralink democracy system that had revolutionized human governance. Admiral Park Jae-hoon stood at the central podium, his uniform, bearing the insignia of the United Earth Defense Force. His weathered face told the story of decades spent in the void between stars, commanding humanity's growing fleet as they explored and colonized new worlds. The lines around his eyes spoke of countless difficult decisions. But none had ever carried the weight of this moment. The massive screens surrounding the hall displayed the same terrifying images that had been shown at the Galactic Council. The Devourers appeared as a dark cloud spreading across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. The red markers showing their advance seemed to pulse with malevolent life, each pulse representing the destruction of entire solar systems. "Fellow humans," Admiral Park began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall and transmitted to every connected mind across human space. "We stand at a crossroads that will define not just our species, but our very souls. The Galactic Council has shown us our enemy, and every other species has chosen to flee." He gestured to the display showing the exodus routes planned by various alien civilizations. Ships were already beginning to gather at the galaxy's edge, preparing for the long journey to distant star clusters. The Zephyrians had mobilized their fastest vessels. The Krillians were loading their warrior fleets. And even the mysterious ethereals were beginning their retreat to higher dimensions. "The Devourers have consumed 3 galactic clusters," Park continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "They have destroyed civilizations that existed for millions of years before humanity even learned to make fire. They have defeated species with technology so advanced that we can barely comprehend it, and now they come for us." Dr. Kim Sojin, rose from her seat in the scientific advisory section. As Earth's leading expert on alien technology, she had spent decades studying the various species that made up the galactic community. Her research had revealed patterns that others had missed, insights that might prove crucial in the coming crisis. "I've studied every species in the Galactic Council," she announced, her voice clear and confident. "The Zephyrians evolved on worlds with extreme gravitational fields, making them masters of speed and acceleration. The Krillians developed on harsh planets where only the strongest survived, creating the perfect warriors. The Ethereals transcended physical limitations through millions of years of mental evolution." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. "But we are different. We evolved as generalists on a world that demanded adaptation above all else. We learned to survive ice ages and volcanic eruptions, plagues and natural disasters. We did not specialize in one area. We learned to do everything." The debate that followed was intense, but surprisingly brief. Representatives from every human colony, every space station, every military unit had their say. The Neuralink democracy system allowed citizens to contribute their thoughts and feelings in real time, creating a collective consciousness that guided the discussion. Captain Choi Minho, commander of the Colonial Defense Forces, stood to address the assembly. His uniform showed the scars of numerous battles fought on the frontier worlds, where human colonists had faced everything from hostile alien wildlife to pirates and raiders. His voice carried the weight of experience earned through countless dangerous missions. "My grandfather fought in the Soul Wars when humanity was still confined to our own solar system," he said, his words carrying across the hall. "He told me stories of battles fought with primitive weapons against impossible odds. My father served in the Centauri campaign, where we learned to fight in the void between stars. Every generation of humans has faced challenges that seemed impossible to overcome." He looked directly at Admiral Park, his expression fierce with determination. "We have never run from a fight. We have never abandoned our homes when danger approached. We have always stood and faced whatever came at us. No matter how terrifying or powerful, I will not be the first generation to break that tradition." Similar sentiments echoed throughout the hall. Colony commanders spoke of their determination to protect the worlds they had built. Scientists discussed potential weaknesses in the Devourer. Technology. Military leaders outlined strategies for defense and counterattack. Citizens connected through the Neuralink system, sent waves of support and courage through the collective consciousness. President Yang Soo-bin, elected leader of the United Earth government, called for order as the debate reached its climax. She had guided humanity through the transition to galactic citizenship, negotiating treaties and trade agreements with alien species. But now, she faced a decision that would define her legacy and humanity's future. "The time for debate has ended," she announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. "The question before us is simple. Do we flee with the other species, or do we stand and fight for our galaxy?" The vote was conducted through the Neuralink system, allowing every human citizen to participate directly in the decision. The results appeared on screens throughout the hall within seconds. The decision was unanimous across all continents, all colonies, all space stations. Not a single human voice called for retreat. "Then it is decided," President Yang declared, her words carrying across human space. "We will stand and fight. Not just for Earth, not just for our colonies, but for the entire galaxy. We will make our stand here, in the galaxy that has become our home." Admiral Park stepped forward again, his expression transformed from grim determination to fierce resolve. "Every shipyard will be converted to military production. Every factory will build weapons and armor. Every human mind will focus on one goal: finding a way to stop the unstoppable." As the great assembly began to disperse, the magnitude of the task ahead became clear. Humanity would face the Devourers alone, armed with nothing but their courage and their refusal to surrender. The other species had already written them off as doomed. But humanity had never been deterred by impossible odds. Ambassador Lee Hanna prepared to return to the Galactic Council with humanity's answer, knowing that it would shock the galaxy to its core. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had witnessed countless historic moments over the millennia, but nothing quite like this. Ambassador Lee Hanna stood at the human delegation's podium, her small figure dwarfed by the massive assembly hall that stretched in all directions. The holographic displays still showed the approaching devourers, their red markers creeping closer to the galaxy's heart with each passing moment. "The United Earth government has reached its decision," she announced, her voice amplified by the chamber's ancient sound systems. "We have chosen to remain and defend our galaxy." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. For several heartbeats, absolute silence filled the chamber. Then, as if a dam had burst, chaos erupted from every section of the assembly. The Zephyrian delegation burst into rapid color changes, their translucent skin flashing through the spectrum as they communicated their shock and disbelief. Warriors roared in what might have been approval or dismay, their massive forms rising from their seats like mountains of muscle and armor. The ethereals shimmered more violently, their partially dimensional forms flickering in and out of visible reality. "This is noble stupidity," declared the ethereal prime, his voice carrying the weight of millions of years of existence. "Your species has been part of the galactic community for mere centuries. Cannot comprehend the true horror of what approaches." The Zephyrian trademaster, his elongated form graceful even in distress, stepped forward with what appeared to be genuine concern. "We offer one final evacuation ship at no cost," he said, his voice carrying through the translator systems. "Your entire species could be relocated to the Andromeda Galaxy within 6 months. This is not cowardice, this is wisdom." From the Krillian section, War Chief Thrak stood and offered a formal military salute. His scarred face showed both respect and sadness as he spoke. "Humanity shows the courage of true warriors. We honor your choice, even as we cannot share it." He turned and began walking toward the chamber's exit, his footsteps echoing like thunder. "The Krillian Empire departs for distant stars. May your deaths be worthy of legend." As the session dissolved into chaos, Lee watched the great exodus begin. The observation windows of the council station showed the massive evacuation fleets. Already gathering, Zephyrian speed ships darted between the larger vessels, like silver fish, coordinating the movement of entire populations. Krillian wore barges, their hulls bristling with weapons that would never be used against the Devourers, formed protective escorts around civilian transports. But even as the majority of each species prepared to flee, individuals began to approach. The human delegation. Dr. Vexhai, a Zephyrian engineer whose brilliant mind had revolutionized faster than light travel, stepped forward with quiet determination. "I have spent my life building engines that run from danger," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Perhaps it is time to build something that runs toward it instead." Commander Thrak, a Krillian warrior whose dishonor had barred him from the evacuation. Fleets knelt before Lee in the traditional gesture of oath-binding. "I've failed my people and lost my honor," he growled, his voice thick with shame. "Allow me to seek redemption in battle alongside your species." Mystic Arana of the Ethereals materialized beside them, her form more solid than Lee had ever seen it. "The ancient archives speak of defensive technologies from the last time such a threat appeared," she whispered. "I will share this knowledge with those brave enough to use it." Within hours, the council station was nearly empty. The great evacuation fleets had departed for distant galaxies, leaving behind only the scattered volunteers who had chosen to remain. The massive chamber that had once housed hundreds of species now echoed with the footsteps of a few dozen individuals. Back in the Sol system, the transformation was unlike anything in human history. The asteroid belts that had once provided raw materials for peaceful expansion now fed the hungry maws of military shipyards. Captain Song Dae-Hien commanded the largest mining operation ever attempted, his ship stripping entire asteroids down to their cores in a matter of days. "We need metal, and we need it now," he told his crews over the communication channels. "Every gram of iron, every trace of rare metals, every chunk of ice, it all goes to the war effort." The space around Earth buzzed with constant activity. Construction ships swarmed over partially built defense platforms, their crews working in shifts around the clock. Lieutenant Bae Yuna coordinated the defensive construction from the command center on Luna. her screen showing the progress of dozens of projects simultaneously. Defense Platform 7 is online, reported one of her technicians. Weapon systems are charging, and the shield generators are at full power. Good, Yuna replied, her fingers dancing across the control interface. Begin construction of Platform 8. Need a complete defensive grid around Earth within 6 months. Similar scenes played out across human space. The colony on Mars became a fortress, its domed cities reinforced with military-grade armor. The mining stations in the outer system were converted into weapon platforms. Even the peaceful research stations studying distant nebulae were equipped with defensive systems. Admiral Park stood in the command center of the orbital shipyards, watching the construction of humanity's first true war fleet. The ships being built were unlike anything humans had ever created, massive vessels designed not for exploration or trade, but for the single purpose of stopping an unstoppable enemy. We're not trying to win a traditional war, he explained to his staff during one of their daily briefings. We're trying to buy time. It's time to study the enemy, time to find their weakness, time to learn how to kill something that has never been killed before. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Human forces would establish a defensive line at the galaxy's rim, using every ship, every station, every weapon they could build. They would hold that line for as long as possible, learning from each encounter with the Devers. As the last evacuation ships disappeared into the void between galaxies, humanity stood alone in a galaxy that had been abandoned by its own children. But scattered throughout human space, volunteers from other species worked alongside their new human allies, each bringing unique knowledge and skills to the desperate defense. The galaxy had never been quieter, but it had also never been more determined. The warning signals came through the deep space monitoring stations at exactly 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The Devourers had arrived 6 months ahead of schedule, their massive forms tearing through the fabric of space itself as they emerged from the void between star systems. The Outer Rim colonies, humanity's first line of defense, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that defied all understanding. Captain Han Yujin stood on the bridge of the destroyer, indomitable, her hands gripping the command rail as she watched the tactical display update in real time. The enemy appeared as massive red dots on the screen, each one representing a machine the size of a moon. Their movement patterns were unlike anything in human military doctrine. They flowed like liquid death through space, consuming everything in their path. Contact at Proxima Station, reported Lieutenant Commander Ru Jamin from the communications station. They're requesting immediate reinforcement. Han activated the ship-wide communication system, her voice carrying to every member of her crew. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. The Devourers have arrived and we're about to face the greatest threat humanity has ever encountered. The defense platform at Proxima Station was a massive structure built from the combined resources of 3 human colonies. Its weapon systems had been designed using the best technology available, incorporating improvements suggested by the alien volunteers who had remained to help humanity's cause. But as the Devourers approached, it became clear that human engineering was no match for their advanced capabilities. The first Devourer machine moved with impossible grace for something so massive. Its surface was covered in shifting patterns that seemed to bend light around them, making it difficult to target with conventional weapons. Energy beams lanced out from its hull, striking the defense platform with devastating precision. The station's shields, powered by fusion reactors that could supply energy for an entire city, collapsed within seconds, reported the tactical officer, his voice tight with shock. The entire structure just ... dissolved. Han watched in horror as the defense platform, which had taken months to build and represented the combined efforts of thousands of workers, simply ceased to exist. The Devourer machine had converted its matter directly into energy, feeding the raw power back into its own systems. The process was so efficient that there was no debris, no wreckage, just empty space where the station had been. All ships concentrate fire on the lead machine, Han ordered, her training taking over despite the terror she felt. Full power to weapon systems, The human fleet opened fire with everything they had: plasma cannons, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles all struck the Devourer machines simultaneously. The weapons that had been effective against pirates and hostile aliens had no visible effect on the enemy. The energy simply absorbed into the machine's hull, making it stronger. The counterattack was swift and devastating. The Devourer machines moved with coordinated precision, their weapon systems targeting multiple human ships at once. The destroyer Challenger exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The cruiser Defiant was torn apart by energy beams that cut through its hull like paper. Within minutes, half the human fleet was destroyed or crippled. "All ships fall back to Wolf 359, Han commanded, her voice steady despite the catastrophe unfolding around her. "Live to fight another day." The retreat was chaotic but organized. The surviving human ships used their superior speed to escape. The Devourer formation, jumping to hyperspace before the enemy could pursue. But the costs had been terrible: dozens of ships destroyed, thousands of lives lost. And humanity's first encounter with the Devourers had ended in complete defeat. Back at the Wolf 359 system, survivors gathered around the command station that had been established in orbit around the system's primary star. Dr. Kim Sojin worked frantically in the analysis center, studying the battle data collected by the surviving ships. Her screen showed detailed recordings of the enemy machines, their movement patterns, and their attack methods. "There has to be something," she muttered, her fingers flying across the control interface. "No machine is perfect. Every system has a weakness." Hours passed as she analyzed the data from every angle. The Devourer machines appeared to move with perfect coordination, their actions synchronized across vast distances. They communicated through some form of quantum entanglement that allowed instantaneous coordination between units. But as she studied the patterns more closely, she began to notice something interesting. "Captain Han," she called out, her voice filled with excitement. "I think I've found something." Han approached the analysis station, her expression hopeful despite the recent defeat. "What do you have, Doctor?" Kim pointed to a section of the battle recording that showed the moment when several human ships had managed to damage one of the Devourer machines. "Look at this." When the lead machine was hit, there was a brief moment where the others seemed confused. Their coordination faltered for exactly 3 seconds. Communication nodes, Han realized, her mind racing through the implications. Using some kind of network to coordinate their actions. "If we can disrupt that network, ... Exactly, Kim confirmed. But it would require precise timing across multiple ships. We'd need to target their communication nodes simultaneously within a margin of error measured in microseconds." The plan that emerged was desperate and dangerous. The human fleet would engage the Devourer formation in direct combat, using their superior speed and maneuverability to get close to the enemy machines. At the crucial moment, every ship would target the communication nodes at exactly the same instant. Hoping to disrupt the enemy's coordination long enough to exploit their confusion. The Battle of Wolf 359 began 3 days later. Captain Han led. The combined fleet, which now included ships crewed by Zephyrian, Krillian, and Ethereal volunteers, the diverse technologies of the different species had been integrated into a cohesive fighting force, each bringing their unique strengths to the battle. "All ships maintain formation," Han broadcast to the fleet. "Remember, timing is everything. We get one chance at this." The Devourer machines detected the approaching fleet and moved to intercept, their weapon systems charged with deadly energy, ready to repeat their earlier victory. But this time the human fleet was ready for them. "All ships, mark your targets," Han commanded as the fleet closed to optimal range. "Fire on my mark, ... now." The synchronized strike hit the Devourer formation with devastating precision. Every ship fired at exactly the same moment, their weapons targeting the communication nodes that Dr. Kim had identified. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The perfect coordination of the enemy machines shattered, leaving them confused and vulnerable. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers faltered. The fleet pressed their advantage, pouring fire into the confused machines. The battle was brutal and costly, with 70% of the human fleet destroyed or damaged. But when the smoke cleared, the entire Devourer formation had been eliminated. News of the victory spread across the galaxy. Through the few remaining communication networks, some species, ashamed of their retreat, began sending supplies and volunteer fighters. Others dismissed it as a temporary setback for the Devourers. But humanity knew they had found the crack in the enemy's armor. The heart of the galaxy had never witnessed such destruction. A supermassive black hole at the galactic center, which had existed for billions of years as the anchor point around which countless stars orbited, was now surrounded by the largest concentration of Devourer machines ever assembled. Their dark forms created a ring of death around the black hole, their purpose clear and terrifying. Admiral Park Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of the flagship Determination, studying the tactical displays that showed the enemy's final formation. The Devourers had spent months gathering their forces here, preparing for their ultimate goal. They intended to consume the black hole itself, converting its massive gravitational energy into power for a weapon that could destroy entire galactic clusters in a single blast. Admiral reported, Commander Lee Soo-young from the sensor station. We're detecting massive energy buildups across the Devourer formation. They're beginning the process. Park nodded grimly. The intelligence gathered from previous battles had revealed the Devourers' plan. Once they successfully drained the black hole, they would possess enough energy to eliminate every living thing in the galaxy simultaneously. There would be no escape, no hiding, no survival for any species. The fleet assembled behind him was unlike anything in galactic history. Ships from dozens of species had answered humanity's call, though many were crewed by volunteers and outcasts rather than official military forces. The Zephyrian speed ships darted between the larger vessels, their crews consisting of engineers and scientists who had refused to flee with their people. Krillian warriors who had been dishonored or exiled served aboard modified cargo ships, their military skills finally finding purpose again. This is Admiral Park to all ships. He broadcast across the fleet communication channels. Today, we don't fight for victory in the traditional sense. We fight for something far more important, the right to call this galaxy home. The response came from dozens of different species, their voices creating a chorus of determination that transcended language barriers. Captain Han Yuzhen, now commanding the assault squadron, acknowledged the order with quiet confidence. Dr. Kim Sojin, working from the mobile laboratory ship, confirmed that all systems were ready for the final phase of their desperate plan. Prometheus had been named after the ancient human myth of the Titan who stole fire from the gods. The strategy was complex, requiring precise coordination between species with vastly different capabilities and fighting styles. The Zephyrians would provide speed and mobility, darting in and out of the enemy formation to create confusion. The Krillians would deliver devastating firepower at close range, their warrior culture finally finding a worthy enemy. The Ethereal would provide defensive support, their advanced shielding technology protecting the fleet from the Devourers' counterattacks. But at the center of the plan was humanity's unique contribution, their ability to act unpredictably. While other species had evolved along specialized paths that made their behavior somewhat predictable, humans remained chaotic and adaptive. This quality, which had often been seen as a weakness in galactic politics, now became their greatest strength. All ships, begin the approach, Park ordered. Remember, stick to the plan until I give the signal. Then we improvise. The fleet moved toward the Devourer formation in a carefully choreographed dance. The enemy machines detected their approach and began to respond, their weapon systems charging with deadly energy. But something was different this time. The Devourer's response seemed slower, more hesitant than in previous battles. Dr. Kim Sojin had been studying the enemy's behavior patterns for months, analyzing every piece of data collected from their encounters. Our breakthrough had come. Just days before the final battle, when she realized that the Devourer's intelligence was based entirely on pattern recognition and prediction. They're trying to predict our actions, she explained to Admiral Park over the communication channel. Their entire strategy depends on being able to anticipate what we'll do next. What if we become completely unpredictable? It's a key moment. Came as the fleet engaged the outer ring of Devourer machines. Instead of following the carefully planned attack patterns, Park gave the signal for Phase 2 of Plan Prometheus. Every ship in the fleet began to act randomly, their movements guided not by military doctrine but by the whims of their individual commanders. Captain Han Yujin led the final assault into the heart of the Devourer mothership, the massive central machine that coordinated the entire formation. Her ship, the Indomitable, had been modified with the best technology available from all species. Zephyrian engines provided incredible speed, Krillian weapons delivered devastating firepower, and ethereal shields protected her from enemy attacks. But instead of following any logical strategy, Han made seemingly random decisions. When tactical doctrine demanded a left turn, she turned right. When wisdom suggested retreat, she accelerated directly toward the enemy. When standard procedure called for weapons fire, she deployed defensive countermeasures instead. The effect on the Devourers was immediate and devastating. Their prediction algorithms, which had successfully anticipated the behavior of countless species across multiple galaxies, simply could not process truly random actions. The machines began to hesitate, their responses becoming slower and less coordinated now. Han shouted into her communicator, "Load the virus." Dr. Vex High, the Zephyrian engineer who had remained to help humanity, had spent months developing a unique weapon. Instead of trying to destroy the Devourers through conventional means, he had created a virus that would attack their very consciousness. The virus was elegantly simple. It taught the machines to question their own purpose. The upload took only seconds. But those seconds were bought with the lives of countless brave souls. Ships from dozens of species threw themselves at the Devourer defenses, creating enough confusion for the virus to penetrate the enemy's central systems. The effect was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers experienced doubt. Perfect certainty about their mission wavered, replaced by questions they had never considered. What was their true purpose? Why did they consume? Was there meaning beyond destruction? Some machines simply shut down completely, their artificial minds unable to process these new concepts. Others fled back toward intergalactic space, seeking answers in the void between galaxies. Few even began to reverse their programming, starting to rebuild some of the worlds they had destroyed. As the immediate threat ended, Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the galaxy's children return home. The massive evacuation fleets that had fled months earlier were now returning. Their hulls scarred by the long journey, but their spirits renewed by hope. The species that had fled came back with different emotions. Some carried shame for abandoning their home. Others brought gratitude for those who had stayed to fight. All carried a new understanding of what it meant to call a place home. Months later, Ambassador Lee Hanna stood before the rebuilt Galactic Council as its first human president. The chamber was fuller than it had ever been, with representatives from species that had learned the value of standing together in the face of impossible odds. When every other species fled, she said, her words carrying across the galaxy through every communication network, humanity stood and fought. When humanity stood and fought, every other species remembered why they called this galaxy home. The words became more than just a motto. They became the foundation of a new galactic civilization. One built on the understanding that sometimes the greatest courage comes from refusing to run away.